Hello, this is John Cross, back this week with the Reach Football Show. Joined this week by Andy Dunn, Chief Sports Writer of the Daily Mirror, Jeremy Cross, Chief Sports Writer of the Daily Star, and Matt Dunn, Football Supremo at the Daily Express. Lots to talk about this week, guys. Looking back after the first week of the Premier League, and also, I guess, on a dramatic week, really a few transfer comings and goings, and ahead of the second week in the Premier League. But I have to say the last few days completely dominated the back pages, the inside spreads about Gareth Bale and the impending return to White Hart Lane for the Welsh forward. I mean, it's an incredible deal, I have to say, bearing in mind he left, 7 years ago, won 4 Champions League titles. I make him the best British export of all time when you tot up the trophies. Never quite seen like that in Spain, of course. But what a coup for Spurs, and perhaps what a game changer, a mood lifter, really, for Spurs. Do you see it like that, Andy? I'll start with you. Do you see it like that as you know, a hell of a signing, and want to change the atmosphere of maybe a bit of negativity after that opening day defeat for Spurs?
Yeah, I do, John. I see it as a great signing, not only for Spurs, but as an incredibly exciting signing for the Premier League as a whole, you know, and also one that Gareth Bale really had to take. He's taken on a hell of a challenge at Spurs. You know, anyone who saw that opening game against Everton, you know, would realise he's not coming to a club that looks as though it's going to be challenging at the very top of the table this season, nor does it look like a club that's going to give him a great deal of chance of adding to that, the silverware you referred to that he's already won. So I understand the sentimental reasons, but from a practical point of view, he's taken on a big challenge going to Spurs. You know, he might have maybe looked around to see if he'd go to a club that maybe is in a better position, but he hasn't. He's gone back to Spurs. A lot of questions to be asked. He needed to do it. I mean, Bale needed to do it. You mentioned here about him, one of the greats. I know you've been putting some messages out there about how great Gareth Bale is. I agree with you. But the danger was that over the last 18 months, all those things were getting forgotten. We were forgetting that incredible goal in the Champions League final against Liverpool. We were forgetting the 4 medals. We were forgetting the 2 La Liga medals. And all Gareth Bale was becoming was a poster boy for exorbitant wages for doing very little. And you know, I know people taking the mickey about him playing golf, but that became a standing joke that, you know, had to affect him. So I'm glad he's coming back. I think there's loads of questions. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. Where will he play in the team? He didn't get on with Zidane. How is he going to get on with Mourinho? You know, who's becoming increasingly abrasive. How much will he lift Spurs? Will he be able to slot straight back in physically wise? He hasn't played much football over the last 18 months, couple of years. All these questions are going to be fascinating. It is just the sort of lift the Premier League needed at the start of a season. As if it needed one, then this is it.
Jeremy, what do you make of it? I'll tell you what strikes me is that basically Spurs lost opening weekend to Everton. 24 hours later, they're banging for Gareth Bale, and no one saw that coming. Is there an element of panic buy about this? Is there also, you know, what sort of a risk is there, do you think?
Well, I agree with Dunny entirely in terms of the bigger picture. You know, look, Bale is a world-class player. He's proved that down the years in one of the toughest environments in football at the Bernabeu. He's constantly lived in the shadow of Ronaldo. So, you know, he needs to be playing every week. He's going back to his former club where he knows a lot of people. He'll feel comfortable. But he's 31, Bale, and he's got a bad injury record. You know, his fitness has been dubious for a long time. So it's hard to think that, is it a long-term thing? No. Is it an indulgent signing? Perhaps. I mean, Mourinho is a master at persuading chairman to indulge him with great signings. He's done it before. He's Shevchenko at Chelsea. He signed Sanchez at United. They didn't work out. So I hope he succeeds. You know, there's a great player in there. But it's ironic that they were so poor against Everton. And then, like you say, 2 days later, they're signing one of the world's biggest stars. So it does feel like it's a bit of a reaction to that opening day defeat. And will he just be papering over the cracks? I mean, Tottenham, they won't challenge for the title just because they've got Gareth Bale in the team. They might challenge for top 4, but, you know, Mourinho should be looking to build a young, exciting team. not sort of bringing people like Bale. I mean, it'll be great for a couple of years, but where do you go then?
No, I agree. Matt, we were on the Jose Mourinho Zoom call yesterday, weren't we, ahead of their game in Bulgaria. It seemed pretty clear that Jose was on side with this signing, didn't it? Or am I being misled here?
No. I think for a man who didn't absolutely refused to speak about Gareth Bale throughout, he said quite a lot. I think that was suggestive. Not least of which the fact he tried to lay dibs on the fact that he got in his move to Madrid in the first place. He likes to put these feelers down to say, like he did with the Dele Alli revelation that Sir Alex Ferguson told him to sign it for United. There's another player he's taken him off at half time, but he's trying to claim on Amazon Prime Video that he was the one who saw his talent first, sort of thing. And in the same way with Gareth Bale, he clearly is a player that he could use because Bale is a match winner. What I don't know is how he was going to use him, because Bale's best football in his final season at Spurs was when he was the team. For everyone sort of tried to deny it, there were games like West Ham away when it was a case, Gareth saying, give me the ball and I'll put it in the top corner for you. And that's what the Spurs team did. It'll be interesting to see how he fits in with a team that's got Harry Kane in it. And in terms of talking about playing in the shadow, it's got to be galling for Gareth Bale. He's going to arrive at a club, with this big reputation. He's got a 5 handicap, and Harry Kane plays off 4, and I think that's going to hurt him right where it but I mean, it's a serious point. They are 2 big players to get into a team, and I think Kane would do brilliantly with Bale wide, supplying ammunition for him to work on. But at the same time, Bale will want to be in the middle of things, and he's not a Christian Eriksen player. I don't know where it leaves Lamela, who was the man signed to replace Gareth Bale, who's now still there, and Gareth Bale comes back and probably wants his shirt back. But no, it is how the dynamic works, and Bale could do so much to lift a Spurs team close to the Champions League, but never actually apart from 2010 into it. But he's not. He's got to fit in with a team if they're going to take the club further now. It's no good just being the best player in an ordinary team.
No, sure. And it does raise the question: where does Bale fit in to the team? Does he? I don't know. Does he play just behind Kane? Does he play wide? How? Will we see a very different? Will we? Sometimes I'm always struck by the fact that basically when you go on to be a superstar in Spain, you come back and basically. You stand out even more in the Premier League. I think, will we see a different, almost better Bale?
Yeah, following on from Matt's point, maybe Kane and Bale will make a decent Ryder Cup pairing, if nothing else, next year. But joke apart, I think you will see a different Bale. Obviously, you're not going to see the Bale that Matt referred to of 7 years ago, the Gareth Bale they sold, the unbelievably dynamic, exciting Bale. You're going to see a different Bale. But I was interested there about Jose Mourinho yesterday, talking about basically a lack of strikers and a need for backup to Harry Kane. Now, obviously, you will see him, I would have thought, in a front 3 with Kane and Son, maybe. He's not going to do the sort of high-octane pressing that sort of Jose was lamenting was not there against Everton. So that's going to be an interesting thing. I don't think he'll be doing that sort of game. But I do think he can play more centrally. Even if closer to Kane maybe, and if Kane's having a rest, that he can even play through the middle. I think he'll play far more forward than say he does, for example, Wales. And I think you can't have 7 years at Real Madrid and not develop as a player. And don't forget, apart from the last couple of seasons, they've been generally successful years. Surviving there for 7 years is an achievement in itself, never mind the 4 Champions League medals. He will have developed as a player. He's a clever player. And I just think that we'll see a Bale who is far more, worldly wise and far more sort of able to adapt. But again, we're not sure exactly what Jose's got planned for him, but it'll be fascinating to see how it pans out.
Yeah, sure. Jeremy, another story that appears to be really gaining momentum, just as we're sort of just become before on the show, really. Liverpool and Thiago. I mean, this one has been has been rumbling all summer, hasn't it? But it would appear that basically finally Liverpool have decided, you know what, we don't need to sell another player. We need to get this one done to give us a bit of a lift. How do you see this one? And were they always going to do it, or do you think they've just been biding their time on Thiago?
No, I think it's inevitable that was always the plan. I mean, they do need to strengthen in that area. I mean, you could argue why try and mend something that's not broken. I mean, they were amazingly good last season. They romped away with the title. They won it by Christmas. They blew everyone out of the water. But, it's going to be tough for Liverpool this season. I was at the Leeds game on Saturday. I know Andy was there as well. And I know it's not the first time they've played behind closed doors, but we all know what a huge advantage a full Anfield is to Liverpool. And it just struck me on Saturday how Leeds did play well, but they put Liverpool under pressure at times. And it was a great game. But I think they're going to struggle this season without fans in the ground. I really do. It didn't matter last season because by the time football resumed, it was all over. But now we're starting afresh. Look, he's a great player, and he would be a great addition to any team, and that includes Liverpool, despite how good they already are.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, do you see it like that? Did Liverpool need a bit of a boost, a turbo boost?
I think, it's an acceptance that it turns out you don't have to be an oligarch or a country to sign a player. If you're in the Premier League, you need to keep going forward just to stay still. And I think it's a recognition that the other clubs around are busy recruiting despite the global situation. And Liverpool just kind of need to keep their toe in the water. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, sure. I think it'd be a great addition, I must say, to the Premier League. I mean, bearing in mind how close he was, Andy, perhaps years ago to joining Man United. I mean, can you imagine? And basically, I just think he's a wonderful, wonderful footballer, isn't he?
He is. I mean, you're signing. Liverpool have signed players in the past. I guess Alisson was acknowledged as genuinely world class when they signed him. Other players they've signed, Salah, Mane, even Van Dijk, we were looking at international class players, but we weren't at the very time they were signed. They were still, I wouldn't say question marks, but sort of, you're wondering how good they were. You never thought that Van Dijk would be as majestic as he's been. You never thought that Mo Salah would be as electric as he's been. We never thought that Mane would be as good as he's been. In other words, they were big money signings, but there was still something to prove. Here they are signing an established world-class operator. I think that's the big thing about that. Do I think that that's the position that they need to strengthen in? Maybe. On the evidence of Saturday, I think I would be more concerned if I was Klopp. I would have expected him possibly to look at making a defensive addition. I really would. I thought defensively on Saturday they were vulnerable. I think they could probably do with more centre-half options and, competition in the full-back areas as well. So I'm a little bit, I'm not surprised, but I would have thought that he might look at that as well. But there's no doubt that it's a huge boost for Klopp and for Liverpool to actually sign a player of whom there is no doubt, there's no question that they are signing a world-class operator. And that can only be good for them.
Yeah, no, sure. It does. I think it brings another dimension to the Premier League. And listen, while we're at it, the Premier League, it's been a staggered start, isn't it? Man United, Man City in action, obviously this weekend. And Jeremy, I'm just going to sort of pick up a point with you. I mean, United obviously start back first ahead of City against Crystal Palace, don't they? There's been a lot of talk about, obviously, on the back of kind of being sent home in disgrace from Mason Greenwood, and kind of media coverage, and should that, is it over the top afterwards? I don't know. It just struck me as that basically, I don't know. I would have thought they're basically trying to keep his head down at the moment. But what do you make of the coverage this week? Has it been gratuitous? Has it been over the top?
No, not at all. Look, I think you reap what you sow. Greenwood made a huge error in judgment on England duty. I know he's 18 and people argue he's just a kid. Well, he is just a kid, but he's not a normal 18-year-old kid. He is an international footballer who is now a guiding light to hundreds, thousands, millions of kids around the world. You know, he has to accept that he is going to be, his life is different now. And you just can't go around doing things like that. Look, he's at an age where hopefully, in the long run, these mistakes that he's making may be the best things that happen to him. He may hopefully he'll learn huge lessons from them and go on to be a mature and sensible guy, as well as a wonderful footballer. But he's got a lot to learn, and he's learning in the deep end at the minute. I mean, this hippie crap business, I mean, anyone who thinks that's a bright idea needs to give their head a shake, because it's not, you know, for any human being to be inhaling that sort of stuff, let alone a professional athlete. I think it's ridiculous. And if people think that he's being picked on, then I disagree with him, to be honest. I think he deserves all the criticism he gets.
Yeah, we should add it's obviously not illegal, is it? And you know, and basically, you know, and sort of players obviously, you know, will dispute and what kind of, you know, whether they inhale or whether they party to it, and sort of the rows will rumble on. But I do think, Matt, you know, I know that sort of kind of it's been, obviously it was clear that sort of kind of Lacazette was pictured with something similar at Arsenal, and I know the club, for example, you know, weren't particularly happy with those pictures. So, you know, surely that then, you know, is a story. If Premier League club not happy with player, you know, with those sort of pictures, I mean, surely that's a story. You know, kind of whether the sort of kind of media pundits or kind of, you know, writers disagree. Surely that's a story, isn't it?
You're talking about Gary Neville, aren't you? You said that you were picking on him. I always remember before a game at Blackburn once, they did a pre-match interview with Mark Hughes with Rovers TV, where she preambled a question by saying, a lot of the papers are reporting that you've lost 3 games in a row. And I thought, hang on a sec, they have lost 3 games in a row. We only write what's there. And if Mason Greenwood wants to do this kind of thing and gets caught out doing it, it is going to get reported. At the time, I thought I was privileged, lucky enough to interview Michael Owen when he was an 18-year-old back in the day. One of the first sort of raft of interviews he did. And I thought, what a joy, that would be an amazing opportunity. We all know how boring he was back then and didn't get much better. He concentrated on his football. He had a 30-year-old head on him when he was 18. It arguably didn't change. Even the gambling thing, he could actually had a habit that he could afford. If you want to reach the very top of the game, you know, back to Gareth Bale, you go and play golf. You go to restaurants early so that you beat the rush. You have egg and chips. You don't go out partying. You work and you work and you work. And that's what Mason Greenwood wants to do to get to the top of the game now.
Egg and chips?
I was going to say egg and chips, mate.
We were taken in Madrid to his favourite restaurant, 5-star restaurant. And we said, what does Gareth normally have? And he said, egg and chips. That's how exciting a player he is, how adventurous he is away from the game.
Now, excuse my ignorance here, but basically, isn't there a wonderful Spanish? What is the Spanish meal? It's ham, egg, and chips, isn't it? But we're not having.
Yeah, well, no, just egg and chips.
Come on, So I think you're being a little bit disrespectful here. It's a Spanish delicacy, if I'm not mistaken. But Andy, what if Greenwood and Foden are involved this weekend, what sort of reception do they get? Obviously, fans are not in the stadium. But I wonder how that will be, perceived. How do the managers handle it? How do fans view it? Perhaps.
I don't think the fans will be particularly bothered one way or the other. I mean, I really don't think the fans will look at it and think, well, Foden shouldn't be playing because of his behaviour in Iceland, or that Greenwood shouldn't be playing because of his behaviour in Iceland, and because of the hippie crack situation. I really don't think. Listen, fans of both clubs will think if Mason Greenwood plays and scores 2 and United beat Palace, then fans will be happy. If Foden plays at Wolves on Monday night and is instrumental in the City victory, clearly City fans will be happy. Whether or not the managers will take a stance is a different issue. I think what was noticeable in the immediate wake of their indiscretions in Iceland was the fact that the statements from the clubs, in particular from Manchester City, were far more emphatic in their condemnation of the players. And City actually said this was conduct from Foden that was unbecoming of a Manchester City player and an England international. Now, to me, that smacks of, well, some sort of punitive action, some sort of discipline. And that might include Foden not starting against Wolves, maybe not even being in the squad. It really wouldn't surprise me if they take a stance themselves. Because, coming back to whether or not this is news, whether or not this is a story about the hippie crap, about whatever, it's a story, it's news, because now, no matter what you think about that particular habit, how serious it is, how damaging it may be, the fact of the matter is, and it's the same with what they did in Iceland, Foden and Greenwood will have been sat down by their clubs in this instance, by their national coach when they were away, and told what not to do, and told the clubs would no doubt be advising their young players, listen, guys, do not, go out and have a party. Mason Greenwood's 19 in 2 weeks' time. I'm sure he's allowed to go out and have a party. He doesn't just have to settle for egg and chips in a game of golf. I'm sure he can go out and do that. But they would have been told specifically, do not go near this stuff. Do not be, and do not, under any circumstance, this. Maybe you can even have a pint, whatever, but don't do this. It can, otherwise, you will be in the newspapers, and it can be damaging as far as they're concerned. So the story is not so much them doing it. The story is them defying the instructions of their club and their national manager at the time. And that's the story, is that these guys who are brilliant players, but who are at the moment, in these instances, defying the orders of their club manager and their national manager. That's why it's a story.
John, It's an issue of trust, basically. It all comes down to trust. All managers want from players is to be able to trust them. No matter how old they are, how experienced they are, trust is the key in the relationship between a player and a manager. And they've broken the trust, and that will take time to repair.
Yeah, no, I agree. Hey, listen, I have to say another player who we'll move on to now, who's on the front pages. If we're talking about kind of rebuilding that trust, and also kind of our players treated fairly across all angles, then I think Jack Grealish obviously was on the front pages, wasn't he? Sort of early on in the lockdown, and kind of would that damage his sort of standing in the game, his reputation? And actually, he rebuilt that relationship, I guess, with the sort of the public, and basically also with, I'm not sure he needed to do it with Dean Smith, who obviously loves the player anyway, but kept Villa up on his own. And I just thought, I admire the way that he's sort of kind of done that, and I guess that's sort of kind of almost the example for Greenwood and Foden of how it needs to be done, I guess. And this week it really sort of kind of, him signing that contract, the new contract, an extension to keep him at 2025, has provoked a debate about whether he perhaps lacks ambition. And I have to say, my personal, I'm gonna. It's the host who sort of has his two pennies here. But basically, I think if you are a kid at school, what bigger ambition can you have than basically wanting to play for your boyhood club, your boyhood heroes, captaining them, wearing the number 10 shirt, and representing them for England as well, but also then perhaps trying to rebuild that team into a great side. And I just do not get where the lack of ambition is coming from, which is angled at Jack Grealish. Matt, where do you stand on Grealish signing that new contract? Is that because of a lack of offers from elsewhere, or is that the right thing to do?
I think it does ultimately shows that he's well grounded and has a sense of where he can best develop his career. But I think in the Amazon Prime Video All or Nothing series, there's a great moment where Danny Rose turns to Daniel Levy in the canteen and says, "Any news from Milan?" And Levy just says, "No, Bournemouth and Newcastle." And he said, "Not Milan then, no." And it's that sort of thing. If the big offers weren't coming in, I think Jack Grealish is better where he is, where he's happy, where he knows the place. Moving just for the sake of it isn't going to help him. I don't think those big offers were there. I think if there was a realistic chance of him going to the Champions League side, I think it would be a different story. And he's because of those same ambitions you talk about, he'd have taken that chance. But why move to a side that's going to fight elsewhere for, there's so few tiers. There's the top six, say, and then the rest could get dragged into a relegation scrap, same as Villa are likely to face again. So why not stay where you're happy, where you've built up a lot of respect, you feel a lot of love, and you can keep working as a player in an environment that you know and understand. And maybe if he has another good season, it'll be different, and those big clubs will come calling next year.
And did you feel a nice warm glow when it was announced that Jack Grealish was going to stay?
No, not particularly, has to be said, no. Listen, I like him as a player. I like him a lot. I agree with Matt. I think that maybe this circumstances have combined really to make it so that there wasn't a bid for him. You know, Dean Smith soon punctured that idea, you know, when Jack had said, he believed in the project and it was a great offer and it's his boyhood club. And then basically Dean Smith gave the interview afterwards and just basically said, listen, we didn't have a bid. So in a way, he didn't really have a choice. He had a choice not to sign a new contract. And I think sort of with the slight uncertainty about what's happening at the moment in the world, in terms of financially in football, then maybe that's why no one was prepared to take that gamble. So, in other words, he probably, I'm not saying he had no choice, but staying at Villa was a good option. But I think it will be for only another year. I take your point about what more do you want him to represent your boyhood club? He's done that now for a long time. He's 25 now. He will have been away with England, and he will know how much he loved that and how much he was honoured to finally get that England camp. He will want more of that. But he knows he'll have a better chance of more of that if he's with a club that is competing in the Champions League, if he's with a club that is competing at the top end of the Premier League, if he is a club where he's surrounded by better players. Now, that's a career choice. That's a professional choice. Now, I'm sure if one of those had come in with a firm offer, it might have been a different outcome. But it's great that he's staying. I think that with Villa showing a little bit more ambition now, with a couple of signings and maybe a couple more in the pipeline, I do think that he's got a year now where maybe he can even do better than he did last year. And maybe things have settled down, maybe we're a bit more settled where we know where we're going next summer, then he might get that move to one of those big clubs. But for now, it's great news for Villa. And, you can't knock. He's got a great contract. He's playing for the club he loves. And, I don't think one more year will do him any harm there.
No, sure. Jezza, do you? I mean, there's been a lot of talk, isn't there, about England and Jack Grealish and whether this is whether he's Southgate's cup of tea. How do you see that one?
I think he's on the fringes and will be on the fringes moving ahead to next summer and the Euros. I think if he has a good season, he'll be in the squad for the Euros, but he won't be starting. I think the level of attacking players that Southgate has available to him now is probably stronger than it's been for decades. So, he won't be a regular starter for England. Just going back to your point about Grealish, I think it's like almost a bit of a romance, isn't it? That he's signed a new 5-year deal. It'll take him to 30 years old. Will he be a one-club man? That's all well and good, but when he packs up at the end of his career, how many medals and trophies will he award if he stays at Villa? He won't have any. He won't win anything with Villa. I think he should. I don't know. I don't think United were genuinely interested in signing him. I think that was just a bit of a flyer, to be honest. But you can't tell me that one of the top clubs hasn't shown an interest in Jack Grealish. I mean, he had a fantastic season, Villa. Like you said earlier, he kept him up on his own virtually. Yeah. Great player, we all know that. But, if Villa get relegated next this season, will he still be at Villa? I don't think so.
No. I personally, I think...
He needs to challenge himself. Yeah. He's a big fish in a small pond.
Yeah.
He'll carry that team again this season. And obviously, it's clearly been sold a vision by the billionaire owners that they're going to bring in this, that and the other. And if they do that, great. But there's no guarantees they will do that. I mean, he needs other good players around him to help him. He can't do it all on his own continually. I just think you want to win things, and he's not going to win anything with Villa. And he's too good a player not to have some medals in his cabinet when he retires.
I think the closest he's ever come to leaving Villa was a couple of years ago when Spurs were interested.
Yeah.
And I think that's as close as it's come, and they're basically miles apart on the price. But that was that's as close as it's come, really. And so it really is a tantalising. Listen, I'm a sucker for a good football fairy tale, and basically I quite like that. Now, speaking of good fairy tales, Matt Dunn, I'm going to ask you about Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang. and that new contract. I mean, blimey, people have been writing for the last 2 months that he's poised to sign it and on the verge of, on the brink of. And so I don't know quite, which journalist or which news organisation can claim that they could call it first. But he's finally done it, via the, modern world, which I actually thought was revolutionary and was quite fun, actually, doing it live from the Emirates via social media in this bizarre world. But I thought that was quite a good bit of fun. Listen, he stands to be Arsenal's top earner. He's 31. Is that the right bit of business for you?
He'll be 34 and he'll still be picking up that wage on that current contract. The last few weeks of his contract, he'll be the new Mesut Ozil, won't he?
Well, there you go. If he's that good, Andy will be pleased. But is that the right 3 years, Matt? Is that? No one's disputing what a fabulous player he is now, are they? But basically, is that the right deal for Arsenal?
A lot can go on in 3 years. It's a big show of faith from Arteta in the player that he is going to remain the driving force that undoubtedly is for Arsenal at the moment. Just with his goals, since he's taken the armband, he's become a bigger player within the whole setup. And he is what Arsenal are pinning their hopes on in the short term, while Arteta buys himself some time to get it sorted around him and builds the side again. I think 3 years is probably a year too long. I don't think they'd have got him if they only offered him 2. That's the negotiation, the chance you have to take. I think Arsenal probably would admit to that privately, that's kind of what they had to do. Because if they'd sold him now, or if he'd been forced to sell him, or they allowed him to run out of his contract in the midst of this project, then it would have been dead in the tracks. So he played himself into the position that Arsenal had to give him that contract. And you just trust that Arteta has a good enough sense of his loyalty and his ambition and drive that Aubameyang will remain good for that money for a long time into that contract.
Andy, you're secretary, chairman, treasurer.
Yeah.
Absolutely leader of the Mesut Ozil fan club. I just, as much as I think this is a great feel-good factor, feel-good story for Arsenal, is there a bit of a sort of an Ozil element about this Aubameyang deal, just because of this sort of kind of huge sums involved, winding down the contract, the age of the player?
It's got to be very similar, John, in the sense that, at the time, when Arsenal had to be seen not to let Ozil go, it was a statement from them, really, to give him, because there's nothing really, even though I am, as you say, a massive fan of Mesut Ozil's, there was probably not a great deal in his recent form when he was signing that contract to suggest he was worth 350 grand a week over a long period of time. Now, there is an Aubameyang's case, that's probably the difference, is that you'd probably say, actually, is there any suggestion he will keep going for 3 years at this level of form? Well, there's a chance he won't. But basically, they couldn't be seen to lose Ozil, for Ozil to walk away in the way that Sanchez did. So they had to make that thing. And they're now paying for it now when Ozil doesn't fit into the plans of a coach who's going to be there for some time to come. And there's probably no way back for him at all. But that's the price that Arsenal pay for where they are, in the sense that they couldn't call Aubameyang's bluff to a certain extent and say, Robbie, you're 31, we can only give you a year, 2 years, because he could have gone elsewhere and they haven't got the pulling power of, say, a Barcelona or a Real Madrid, whoever would have taken him. So they had to give him this contract, Matt's right, even though it is, incredibly excessive. Bear in mind, you'll have Willian on decent wages, well into his 30s as well now. So, you do foresee problems, but not as many problems as there would have been if they hadn't tied him down. And by the way, John, I'm glad you like that social media contract announcements. I found it absolutely nauseating, I have to say. I mean, Aubameyang sitting there, this is where I belong. This is my family. I want a legacy. He's been there 30 months. I know why it's his family, because his family are just about to give him about 50 million quid over 3 years. I'd be adopted for that amount of money. This is my family, as he gazes wistfully around the Emirates. Do me a favour.
No, I'll tell you the reason I liked it, let's be honest, Arsenal these days, and particularly in this climate, is so much about the social media following. And I just thought, well, why not play into that? It was a feel-good story, and I just think it's a bit different. And I just thought it was a little bit wacky. It's something, different to do. But I just think, listen, I'm not a fan of all elements of Arsenal social media following, but I just think it basically it's the, it was just a sort of good opportunity to make the most of it. I thought it was a right giggle. But Jezza, I was going to ask you about Arsenal now. Do they? I mean, we had this discussion a little bit last week. We were very split, weren't we, whether Arsenal are kind of going to get back in the top four. Is this signing of Aubameyang and indeed their business in general going to be good enough to get them back in the Champions League places, which has to be their target now, I would argue?
Simple answer, no. I think Arsenal are a top 6 team at best. I think they will be back in the Europa League, I think, come the end of this season. I mean, they're very reliant on Aubameyang, aren't they, with his goals? I mean, what did he get last season? 36?
Off the top, I should know this off the top of my head. Well, I think he's obviously told Arsenal it was closer to 50 to get those sort of wages. So
I think how his contract situation has panned out is reflective of how reliant they are on him, because they were clearly desperate to keep him. But players like Aubameyang hold all the aces. They all have all the power in these negotiations. This is probably going to be his last big contract of his career. So he had to nail it down with Arsenal, and he had him over a barrel, really, and it's played out that way. But do they have enough strength in depth? No, not to get in the top 4. I think the top 4 is so competitive now. It's going to be Liverpool, both Manchester clubs, Chelsea. Obviously, they've spent over 200 million quid this summer. And Arsenal just haven't strengthened enough. I mean, keeping Aubameyang's a great boost for them, but, they've not done a lot of other business, really, that springs to mind. So, they may win another cup competition. They're obviously a decent cup team, as they proved with the FA Cup. No one backed them to win it when it got to the last 4. So, if you can pick up another trophy next season, that'd be a good season. But top 4, no chance.
Matt, we've got our first glimpse of another top 4 contender Monday night. Chelsea, and Werner in particular impressed me. Havertz obviously also played. Kurt Zouma said after the game, we've got the weapons to hurt Liverpool. They face each other at Stamford Bridge on Sunday. Do you see it like that?
Yeah, well, Leeds had the weapons to hurt Liverpool 3 times, didn't they? So they're quite vulnerable at the moment. I think it'll be another great game. I thought that Chelsea hit the floor running, and it wasn't perfect. There was some weaker performances, some stronger performances, but there was enough there that seemed to be clicking together early to make them someone who can really give Liverpool a game. And they've shown. I mean, Lampard showed in the behind closed doors game that they've got. He's got the wit to come up with a plan to do something against Liverpool.
Yeah, sure. Andy, do you think Chelsea are going to be so much the stronger, for those new signings? And which one of those really sort of kind of is the one to excite you, do you think, this season?
Werner is definitely one to excite, with the pace and directness that he's got. He will cause Liverpool problems. I like a lot of their signings. I would like to see, and I've said this many times, that you've got to address these defensive issues. You've got to address the goalkeeper issue. Otherwise, they will keep conceding, goals. And what you will see on Sunday, what you will see on Sunday is, as Kurt Zouma says, Chelsea causing that Liverpool backline problems without a doubt. What you will also see is Liverpool's front line causing Chelsea's backline far more problems than Chelsea caused them. That's why Liverpool will win the game, and they will score goals. I mean, they will score goals. Chelsea can see goals. Liverpool score goals. I don't think enough as yet has not been done to sort those problems at the back. I didn't think they're particularly solid in that opening game. And other sides might have capitalised, and that will be their Achilles heel. It's not rocket science, and I think Liverpool will cause them. And one thing again, me and Jeremy there at Anfield on Saturday, Leeds were great. Liverpool are probably affected by the lack of a crowd. But listen, you come away, and they were quite fortunate in Liverpool conceded. Liverpool were gifted a late penalty winner from Rodrigo by a daft challenge. But then when you come away, and a couple of hours later, you're sitting there thinking about it, and Salah, Mane, and Firmino, their combination, they could have had 6 or 7 against Leeds, and you wouldn't have said, well, that was like, that was undeserved. So that's why Chelsea, as much as their signings excite me, I do think they'll still be vulnerable. I do still think there's question marks about Lampard's ability to construct a defensive performance, not just a defence, but a defensive performance throughout the team. And that's why I think Liverpool will win on Sunday.
Yeah, Jezza, is Chelsea's biggest problem the goalkeeper? I mean, Kepa. I mean, blimey, 73 million pounds, record signing for at the time for a goalkeeper. He still looks so vulnerable, doesn't he? And I think the biggest thing of all, he's not that short, but he looks so short because of his lack of kind of presence, I guess.
Yeah, he wasn't very. For Lampard, you just want him to look more confident than he is. We had that incident with him last season. Was it last season when he refused to come off? Or was it the season before?
Season before.
Yeah.
It's almost like that one incident changed him. Psychologically, he just doesn't command his box. You're right. I mean, it sounds daft criticising his height, but he just doesn't look enough to be a world-class goalkeeper. When you look around at the competition, Alisson's huge, Ederson's huge, probably the 2 best goalies in the Premier League last season. Yeah, it's an Achilles heel for Chelsea. They need to sort it. They're after Mendy, aren't they, from Rennes? It sounds like they're going to try and bring him in, where does that leave Kepa? I mean, when you consider how much they paid for him, it's been a disastrous signing. Yeah. They've brought in Thiago Silva. I mean, he'll be a great addition. He's not a long-term signing, I presume, given his age, but he's played at the highest level for some of the biggest clubs in the world, so he should give them more stability. And they've obviously got Chilwell. I know Chilwell didn't play against Brighton, but they've spent 50 million on England's left back. So, you look at Chelsea and you think, is Lampard's attitude, well, we're going to score more goals than if a team scores 3, we'll score 4. I mean, they've got so many goals in them. But, Kevin Keegan tried that at Newcastle once, didn't he? And it didn't really work out for him. But they're going to be great to watch, Chelsea. But Andy's right. The question mark is, how many goals are they going to concede? Because that defence last season was nowhere near good enough for a team that wants to challenge for the title. And they have to challenge for the title. Lampard's been brave enough and bold enough to admit that. He's spent a lot of money. And, Abramovich is going to want them to be up there challenging Liverpool and City. I'm not sure they will, really, but let's see.
Matt, do you think they'll finish top 4 this season?
Yeah, I do. I think in terms of their forward line, I think they're going to have enough goals. People forget, when they first went to Liverpool, Salah, Mane and Firmino, no one was saying that's a well-beating top 3. That's something that developed. They were £30 million players, pulled in from Southampton, the Bundesliga, and a Chelsea reject. And it just worked. And I just think that with the quality of the players they've now got to get them goals, I think that they could develop into quite a potent force.
No, sure. I was just going to touch on one team that really caught the eye opening weekend, Andy, Leicester. There's been a little bit of talk. I mean, they just missed out on Champions League. There's obviously been talk about kind of, are they going to be as sort of as strong as old Chilwell? They look fantastic again, and that man Jamie Vardy scoring. I mean, do you see them as being top 4 contenders again this season?
No, I don't. To be honest, I was disappointed with the way they finished last season. Obviously, they've lost Chilwell. The new recruit Castagna, he looks a very good player. I just don't think they've got the depth, John. And I think other teams have improved around them. So I think Chelsea will be better than last season. Arsenal will without a doubt will be better than last season. And then clubs sort of below that top 6, 7 or 8, such as Everton, will be better. Even Newcastle going far down will be better. I think there'll be more competition amongst those type of teams. I like Leicester a lot. I like the job that Brendan Rodgers has done. I like the team. I like the first team, the way it's balanced. I just don't think it's got a strong enough depth to the squad when other teams have improved around it, unless he makes some decent recruits between now and October the 5th, whenever the window shuts. I just think they'll fall short of that top 4, and I think more realistically it will be a challenge for them to finish in the Europa League places. I think, for example, that Wolves will also be on a par with Leicester. So as nice as they played, I think they were also playing a team that I know everyone's rushing to make judgments from one match day, as the Premier like to call it. And you clearly can't do that. But if you were to do that, then you would say that the team that Leicester beat, West Brom look as though they are going to confirm our suspicions that because they haven't recruited greatly, they will be down there in a relegation battle. Likewise, Fulham.
Yeah. What did we learn, Jezza, from that first weekend? I mean, I think I learned that Everton's signings hit the ground running quite quickly. What else did we learn?
We learned that the player we all said, or at least I said last time, that could be the worst signing of the summer, James Rodriguez, is actually a top quality player.
It's not bad left foot, is it?
I mean, he was so good. I think he created 5 chances in one game for Everton in that great win there at Tottenham. And alongside him, Alan, he looked great. He ran the midfield. Everton, that's a massive win for Everton, because I did a column on this last week just saying that game, although it was the first game of the season, it was a massive game for both managers, Mourinho and Ancelotti, because the expectations on those two are so high this season. We've got a lot to prove. I know it sounds daft saying that with about 2 guys have won countless trophies down the years, but they're under pressure at their respective clubs, and Everton obviously handled that better. Their signings look good. They've settled in very quickly. Will Everton challenge for silverware? Perhaps they might have a run in the cups. I think they've got to aim for the Europa League, haven't they? Really?
Yeah. Matt, what did you learn? What did you take from the first weekend?
The thing that stuck out and had me kicking myself straight away, because I did think about a week ago, this is when we were doing our predictions, that it was something I should mention, is I think I learned how easily we overlook West Ham's ability to implode every season. Yeah. I can't believe, looking back, that they didn't get a mention for relegation candidates. And if I could write time again, certainly after the first weekend, you've got to say it's a mess again. The club's a mess. There's talk of takeovers, which probably aren't going to happen because of various covenants and restrictions on the owners keeping hold of the club till 2023. But there's when Mark Noble's so public about letting players go and feels he can be that public, the whole place is just a mess. The only difference is that, I suppose, when fans come back, we were talking earlier about giving Liverpool a boost. It's not going to affect West Ham because they probably won't notice they're there. But yeah, the whole project has been a mess since they got the stadium on the cheap and tried to put a ragtag outfit out there when it demands a Champions League team to play in that stadium. The project is just going sour, and you look at the players who saved them, like Antonio last season. They're not getting any younger. The Declan Rice, I don't think, has played as well as he had done earlier last season, especially.
Is that because of the mood? Is that because of the mood? Do you think?
I can't believe it isn't. And if it is just coincidence and he can play in that sort of environment, then fair play to him. He stands a chance in the game, because it must be difficult. There doesn't seem any cohesion there. Individuals around the club are great people. I think David Moyes is a good manager, better manager than perhaps his recent reputation has allowed him for, and he's probably doing his best. But the whole thing from the top down, it just disjointed and it doesn't work. And some of those Noble can't do it himself anymore. He's not got the legs every week to hold the team together. And yeah, you just fear for them, because if they do go down, goodness knows what happens to them then.
Yeah, do you know what? It was such a car crash at times last season. I think it's a massive tribute to David Moyes that I can't think of anyone that actually tipped them to be bottom 3 this season. Well, one journo pal of mine actually did sort of pull me up on that and said, actually, I backed him. But basically, I don't know that many people see him. But now I think you're mate, you're right.
It was an oversight.
Yeah, they're right. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely spot on. Listen, guys, I was just going to finish with, obviously, there's the EFL have come out rather bullish this week. The Premier League and indeed the FA, are being a little bit more cautious, aren't they? I don't know whether it's shall we say, cost effective for Premier League teams to let 1,000 fans in, which is obviously the cap. It's certainly not for the FA at Wembley. Their hopes of getting limited numbers back for the Wales game seems to be now off and floundering. It doesn't seem as if that will be practical. That's next month. But it's from, obviously the EFL are now pushing and are sort of giving the go-ahead for this 1,000 fans back in almost immediately. Andy, how do you see that going? I mean, everyone is desperate. Everyone is desperate to get fans back in. We know that. How do you balance the need and the push for clubs and from football generally against the safety of supporters and indeed the general health and welfare of the country?
I think I think it's a difficult one, clearly. However, what I would say is that when Project Restart was first mooted, there was a lot of people, including myself, who were very sceptical about how it would be done, whether it was practical, about the dangers of it, and those doubts were proven totally misplaced. It was an incredible testament to the organisation of the Premier League and indeed the EFL that the Premier League and the Championship went ahead, resumed and was completed pretty much without a hitch, was done brilliantly well. Now, having proved they've done that, I just think that they need to be not indulged, but to say, okay, well, listen, we've seen how you can operate. Now, if you tell us, if Tottenham Hotspur or Manchester United, as I think both want to do, say you really believe there are meaningful test events with, say, 12,000, 15,000 people in the stadium, is practically very, very, very safe, and that you can pull that off, you can organise that, then I think that should have been allowed. And I understand the Premier League club's really serious frustration with not being allowed to do that. The idea of having 1,000 people inside Old Trafford, say, for Man U Palace on Saturday, it's ridiculous. It's not a test event. What are you testing? You're not testing anything. You'd say, 1,000 people, probably corporates. You'd have more stewards there, more police there. It's just absolutely ludicrous. I understand that. It's a different kettle of fish if, say, just up the road from me here, Crew Alexandria, say, want 1,000 people in. Well, they're only getting 3,500 for a normal crowd anyway. So that would be a genuine test event. This is 1,000 people in South Premier League clubs would not be a test event. So I understand their frustration. And I do think that, while the Premier League obviously needed the go-ahead from the government to get Project Restart underway, to complete their season, to fulfil contracts, it was a commercial necessity. So they are thankful for the government that they were allowed to do that. On the flip side of it, the government and politicians are not slow to get on football's bandwagon. They're not slow to try and use it as some PR tool. So I think in this case, they should really, really sort of do their utmost to allow Premier League clubs to get more people than 1,000 people inside the stadium. And then lower down the leagues, listen, we've seen, now I'm not saying anything to do with COVID, but we've seen Macclesfield go to the wall in the last couple of days. Obviously, Bury went to the wall last season. We've seen other clubs like Wigan, Bolton in recent years really struggling. And this situation with no fans is only going to exacerbate the problems on so many clubs down there. So it's essential, A, that we get as many back as we can to the Football League, and B, the Premier League can be allowed to do meaningful test events with 20% of people inside the stadium.
Jezza, right thing to do in the current climate where we're seeing, local lockdowns. There's talk of, more lockdowns across the country.
It's a tough one, this. I agree with a lot with what Andy says. I mean, we've all been to games without any fans there, and it's just not the same, is it? It's just a totally surreal experience. But on the other side of the coin, you've got to be careful. I mean, 20%. The awkward thing is, obviously, different levels of football clubs have different capacities. So, like Andy said, 1,000 people at Crewe, it would be a third full. Whereas 1,000 people at Old Trafford, you wouldn't probably notice they're even there. 20% of 70,000, that's a lot of people. How do these people have to be tested before they go into stadiums? How long will it take them to get into the stadiums if they're social distancing? There's a lot of issues to overcome. We're all desperate for fans to be back, or a percentage of fans to be back, to show signs that life is slowly getting back to normal. But the government are so paranoid about a second wave of this virus. Would that happening be deemed appropriate, given that various parts of the country are back in lockdown? or semi-lockdown, so to speak. I don't know. It's a tough one. I mean, football's led the way so many times, and so many examples of how it's done that in the last 6 months or so. And this would be another example of how football can show the world that, you know, we can get back to some form of normality. I think it's going to be a long time before we see full stadiums again, maybe until there's a vaccine found. And we might not even ever find a vaccine. You know, who knows? It's just the uncertainty of it all. It's a tough one. I can see why people argue for it, and I can also see why people argue against it.
Matt, I mean, there's obviously the EFL trying it this weekend. There's still a lot of pressure, isn't there, on the Premier League to you know, do their bit, as Matt Hancock said, for the EFL. Where are we with that process? Do the Premier League owe the EFL something? Should they be doing a bit more?
Well, they're spending quite a lot of money on transfer signings, aren't they? So when we're all walks of life, the EFL clubs are saying the government should help us out with in the same way as they've helped restaurants out. Well, actually, within the whole framework of the game, there is money coming into the game still. There is still money in there. And it's really hard to expect the government to bail them out when football won't look after itself. It's a constant problem that the top clubs don't seem to see the structure underpinning them as vital to their own existence. And that was ripped up when the Premier League was first set up. Nobody's got a strong enough voice explaining what that is. And if we want to have 92 clubs, which is a question we need to ask ourselves, because there won't be 92 unless we do something. You know, do we want 92 clubs? You know, if we could get by with fewer clubs, then perhaps there's less pressure on those clubs to survive. I quite like the fact we've got so many different clubs representing so many corners of the country, and you've always got a local club, you know, wherever you live. But yeah, it's not doing enough, and I don't think it'll ever change, because ultimately I spoke to one chief executive who of a lower league club, who'd also been a chief executive of a similar size club which got to the Premier League, and they said, you know, the attitude is those clubs that work their way up there say, well, we've done it, you know, we did it, no one helped us, why should we help you? And football is a competition, and to expect one club to bail out a team they're going to play next week, you know, why should they? That's the contrary viewpoint, and the two things don't mix. You need to have stronger leadership at the very top, stronger recognition from the Premier League board to drive this, that actually the clubs do need to dip a hand in their pocket. I spoke to a good friend of yours, Paul Scally, the other week.
Speak to him without my permission.
Moments, he suggested, why aren't we taxing these signings between Premier League clubs? Because, you know, you pay 40 million to a Premier League rival. You know, if you could take 10% of that 4 million and give it to a club in the EFL, you know, that's a saviour. You know, if you are going to carry on spending these obscene amounts of money in the current climate to keep going and keep competitive, there should be some recognition that what you're doing isn't really morally right, not in the current climate, and actually it's going to cost you money to do if you want to behave that way. And I don't think that's such a bad idea.
No, it is interesting views. We've seen Macclesfield go this week in the heartbreaking circumstances. You know, Lord alone knows whether they could even come back as a Phoenix club, or kind of, you know, what guys. And I have to say, I do think League One, League Two clubs are going to be hit so hard over the coming months. Football has to look after itself. But look, interesting views, guys. Thanks so much for joining. Really appreciate it. Nice talking to you all. I hope everyone's enjoyed the show, and see you again next week.